Why are they hiding history? There were so many people who were completely offended by the mere suggestion that nobody really knows what's going on, and we never will know until we establish the freedom to put all the arguments to rest. People found this to be an incredibly offensive concept to even consider. I think it was that show that I said it, but anyway, that's the problem. People's ego kicks in, and no one likes to be told that they don't know. Everyone likes to believe that they've got the answer to the puzzle and that they are an authority on wherever it is that they've been researching. And so many people may be an authority on certain topics, but in regard to this control grid, there's very, very few people who actually know what's going on. And it's people's claim that they have the answer all the time and locking themselves into that and convincing others that anybody who disagrees with them is the enemy that causes so many problems. Because as I've said so many times, there's so many different rabbit holes to go down, and there's so much different research you can look at and so many different conclusions you can come to. It just depends on what information you've had access to. And really, when you just put it all down and step back and really look at the entire thing on the world stage and remove yourself from any stake in the outcome, any stake of what you believe, because that's unfortunately what we tend to do as well. Once we lock ourselves into a belief system, we look for stuff to reinforce it. But if you can put all that down and just put it all on the shelf as stuff to be considered, all possibilities should be considered, absolutely. But what should be believed? That's the question. It should always be remembered that on the path to knowing, on the path to enlightenment, whatever you want to call this journey that you're on, belief is the enemy of knowledge. Because if you lock yourself into a belief system, you just close yourself off to other possibilities, and there is such a wider picture that's going on here, folks. There really is. And when you consider the concept of them simply recycling civilization, recycling history, recycling the human race, as it were, it really does begin to make a lot of sense. The question would be, of course, who is they? Who are the ones who are doing this? What is really going on here? Because when you look at it really rationally, ladies and gentlemen, nothing that exists in the world today can be explained by our current version of historical events that we're given, our current explanations that we're given for anything. Nothing explains the situation of the world today. Nothing that comes from mainstream or academic sources anyway. You really begin to look at it, folks, and you realize that academic institutions are there to train people what to think, not how to think, but what to think. And the governments are there basically to corral, manage, and appease the people while the world is demolished around them. And unfortunately, it's us that's doing the demolition because of the fact that we are forced to pay to be alive. So we need to go and get jobs all the time, which all involve destroying the environment or waging war or building the machinery to continue to wage war or working within governmental systems to figure out better ways to oppress the people or supplying the people with further appeasement to stop them protesting about destroying the environment or perhaps entertaining them in some way. And it's this whole economic system, the fact that we are forced to pay to be here, that creates the need to demolish the world that we live in order to collect the paper we need to be alive. And it appears that once people begin to wake up to this fact and start to realize how much they are actually being farmed, then something is done to wipe that civilization out and start again and begin the operation anew and teach the new civilization a new history. And again, that might be a very strange thing for people to even consider, but you've got to ask yourself the question, as I've asked before, how long would it take to hide history and to change history? And the answer is 1 generation. That's all it would take. And when you think of a world without communication, if you were to bring down the communication system, if you were to revert to a time of, say, the 1900s when we didn't really have mass communication, and if this were happen via some type of mass cataclysm, a flood or a perceived comet impact or whatever, however they do it, if you were to destroy a lot of the people who are here and then scatter the remnants, then a lot of them would be confused, a lot of them would have no idea what had just happened, and over a series of generations, over a very short period, a period of perhaps 1 or 2 generations, it would be very easy to deliver the people whatever history you wanted to deliver to them. and to keep all the technology that suited you to yourself, keep it secret. And even when you look at some of the stories that have been presented to us, such as the old story we know about how the Rothschilds gained control of the Bank of England. During the Napoleonic War, the Rothschilds put out the rumour that the French had actually won the war, which caused all the British stock prices to crash, and they were able to buy up the Bank of England for pennies on the dollar. And once the official messenger got back to London after the battle and informed everyone that it was actually the other way around, that England had won, all the stocks skyrocketed again. But the question is, how was Rothschild able to get that information before anybody else? Because apparently we didn't have radio or any other form of communication at that time. And the English messenger left straight away. As soon as the battle was decided, the message was sent straight to England so they would know immediately. And yet Rothschild knew first. How did that happen? What sort of secret technologies do people have behind the scenes that we don't know about? How long have they had these technologies? What really goes on in the holiest of holies of all of these secret places we're not allowed into? And how much of what we're fed about the Industrial Revolution and the progression of civilization, the progression of technology, is simply theatre for the masses, so that we can see this gradual progression, so that we're all amazed by all this stuff that happens, all this new technology that suddenly appears on the scene. What if this technology has been here for a very long time, and that we just simply fed dribs and drabs of it, so it looks like there's this gradual progression to what we're seeing now, which is the rollout of our super new convenient world, all run by 5G, where everybody will have access to everything, but really it's just one big surveillance system to keep tabs on everybody. And it's also a very useful system for harvesting all the information that anybody has, because you get to digitize all the books, you get to find out what knowledge exists at this particular cycle, who's thinking what they're writing down. You get to collect all this information about everybody. Then you remove all the books and you digitize everything, and then you switch the power off so they don't have access to it, so they lose all of their knowledge from the last cycle. Then you might say, well, what do you mean switch the power off? Well, you flood the world, you create a cataclysm, you create something which takes down this civilization that effectively switches the power off. It really does make a lot of sense, folks. You see the gradual progression of all this, again, like I said, leading up to what we now believe to be this huge new convenience to our life, but really it's just one big surveillance system and one big mechanism with which to remove the knowledge and the knowledge base and the life skills from humanity for the end of the cycle. It will also be a very, very convenient system to use if there was some type of cataclysm. Perhaps if you were planning to stage some type of cataclysm, it'll be an easy way of locating where the survivors are, where the pockets of people who survived the event ended up being, and being able to bring them back into the fold and retrain them and start the process again. You could think of it as kind of like microchipping your pets in case they get lost in the storm. So, is this what's happening? Well, I'm not saying that it is what's happening, but it certainly would explain a lot of things, so I just thought I would put it out there, because it is certainly something worth considering. It would really explain a lot of things, folks. There's a lot of evidence to support this type of scenario being a reality. Even when you look at some of the old paintings that you see, UFOs in the paintings and all sorts of weird stuff in these so-called ancient depictions of things, even biblical paintings have UFOs in them, which is very odd. The question must be put forth, are these paintings real, or are they simply put there as red herrings to distract us and keep us asking questions? You never know, but it's got to be something worth considering. And we've been lied to on so many levels already. The question is, how deep does the lie go, and how far outside of the box are people prepared to think? And with what's coming and the 5G and the surveillance grid and the whole smart grid that's rolling out, it's important that people do start thinking about things, folks. And a lot of people may think that I've been sort of moving away from the whole topic of 5G a little bit lately, but really it's all interrelated. When I began looking back at history and began revisiting my roots, simply out of necessity, really, you do begin to see how it all ties together, how this system could be constructed every single time they run this cycle, how it's all this natural progression, how all this predictive programming works, why all these predictions are there and they always seem to come true. because it's not a prediction, it's a familiar cycle. It's a planned cycle, it's a repeating cycle. And there's every indication to suggest that this is a real possibility, ladies and gentlemen. And you think about it, what Agenda 21 is all about, removing people from country areas and putting them into concentrated pockets of civilization, most of which are near the coast or in low-lying regions. So in such a scenario, it would be very easy to simply flood the coastal areas. I mean, people are expecting it anyway, aren't they? They're expecting the oceans to rise because of global warming and all this rubbish that they're fed. So there's all sorts of predictive programming to suggest this. You know, Agenda 21 is pushing people into the cities, it's pushing people close to coastal regions, and when you look at all of the lost civilizations that are there beneath the ocean, there's every indication that this has happened time and time again. And again, I know it's a lot to consider. I know it's a completely different scenario to what people may consider anything like history to be. But again, there is a lot of evidence to support this type of scenario. And as far as 5G and the surveillance grid goes, well, there's a lot of steps being made in that direction, a lot of positive steps, and it's really important that people do keep a focus on that. Even with other research that they're doing, it's important that people make a stand for themselves in their own community, because that's really what this is about. You know, this is all one big game of free will. That's what this world is. That's what this experience is, folks. It's freedom of choice, and we have a choice as to whether to comply with this whole surveillance grid or whether not to. We can do research, we can do all the stuff that we're doing, but we have to pay attention to what is happening in our immediate surroundings at the same time. It's very important that people do this, and it's very important that the focus does stay on 5G and does stay on the prevention of this smart grid being rolled out. But at the same time, putting it in the context of history really does explain things to me a lot. It really does help me see things a little clearer, especially when I consider the fact that this is very likely a recurring cycle. I mean, it really just does make a lot of sense to me, folks. And again, as I said, I know it's really thinking outside the box for a lot of people, and it's going to be a hard thing for people to even comprehend. And I'm not saying that it's true. I'm simply suggesting that it's a possibility simply because of the overwhelming amount of evidence to support it. And maybe I'll get back to that at some other show, in a future show. Perhaps I can do something about presenting you some type of evidence that I'm talking about. But I did actually cover a lot of this in my 2005 book, Earth's Forbidden Secrets, where I pointed out the fact that everything we're taught about history is wrong, that there's so much wrong with it, it's almost impossible to define in one book. And that book is still available for free download on my website as an ebook, folks. It's always been there. There's never been any cost for that book. And again, I don't agree with everything in the book now, but that's just where my mind was in 2005. But I still certainly agree with the first half of the book, just pointing out the complete farce we're being presented with as history. And again, I really do suggest you go and watch that video by New Earth about the colossal ancient earthworks in America. That's a very, very interesting video, folks. Whether you agree with a lot of the stuff she says or not, the fact that these old remains are there is very, very interesting. And they're not just there in America. I mean, that's the thing. They're all over the world. There's lost civilizations buried everywhere. It looks like I probably will be doing that trip to the Azores as well. I'm simply finding the lure of the prospect of sunken pyramids and sunken ruins to be irresistible. And I've also been told that Rafah Crossing is now open into Gaza, and I've approached the Egyptian embassy, and I've got friends running some questions to the Palestinian Authority to see if I can possibly gain entry into Gaza Strip as well. I know I wanted to come home and rest for a while, but the fact that Rafah Crossing is open and the opportunity that it may provide to get back into Gaza and hopefully make the film I've wanted to make since 2012